Welcome to this high school session, Learning Israel's Story with Scholar in Residence, Gil Troy. And so at this point, I'd like to hand the program over to a high school student that I'm fairly fond of. It's her birthday today, so let's all be a little bit friendlier because this is exactly what she wanted on her birthday, was to host the Gil Troy event. Shelby Leibovitz.
Please rise for Hatikva and join us. Zion, Sophia, Odlofa, Tikvatenu, Hatikva, Bashnot Alpayim, Liatam Choshi, Be'artenu, Eretz Zion, Yerushalayim. Liyotam choshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim. Distinguished scholar in North American history at McGill University, currently living in Jerusalem, Gil Troy is an award-winning American presidential historian and a leading Zionist activist. He is most recently the editor of the new 3-volume set, Theodor Herzl Zionist Writings, the inaugural publication of the Library of the Jewish People. 2 years ago, he and Natan Sharansky co-authored Never Alone, Prison, Politics, and My People. This memoirfesto, or manifestar as people call it, was published by Public Affair of Hachette. This summer, an updated paperback edition will appear, as well as the Hebrew translation. In the foreword to Troy's best-selling instant classic, The Zionist Ideas, Visions for the Jewish Homeland, Then, Now, Tomorrow, Natan Sharansky writes, "This magnificent work is the perfect follow-up for Arthur Hertzberg's classic The Zionist Idea, combining, like Hertzberg's, a scholar's eye and an activist's ear. Gil Troy demonstrates that we now live in a world of Zionist ideas with many different ways to help Israel flourish as a democratic Jewish state." Troy has published essays in the American, Canadian, and Israeli media, including writing essays for the New York Times, Campaign Stops in 2012 and 2016. He wrote a column for the Daily Beast, Secret Lives, putting current events in historical perspective, and writes a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post. Now introducing Gil Troy.
Thank you and happy birthday. So I'm really honored to be here, and I appreciate that you're taking your time in the middle of a Sunday afternoon to struggle with these issues and to learn about these issues. And so let's set some ground rules. First of all, you have my email there, giltroy@gmail.com. So if in the end we don't get to all your questions, feel free to ask the questions afterwards. Also, over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, if you find yourself in university, if you find yourself in any kind of situation, they say, I just wonder what some crazy person who has been fighting for Israel's dignity and for the meaning of Zionism for the last 20, 30 years on campus might think. You have now my email, and I'm really happy to kind of have back and forth, and I think that's actually how we met Nolan many, many years ago. Most important, feel free to ask the tough questions. I'd much rather, frankly, be in Jerusalem, even with all the anxiety, than traveling around the United States of America and Canada I've been doing for the last week and a half. So I didn't come here to air kiss. And we have difficult questions that are being asked. We have difficult issues we have to struggle with. And we also have to push back against the new approach in universities. I spoke at Loyola Marymount on Thursday night, and I said, independent of the Israel-Zionism issue, I said, it breaks my heart that too many professors these days, and more I know, too many high school teachers these days, say something, teach something, and just want it parroted back. I say, for me, that's boring. I want you to struggle with your own experiences, your own wisdom, your own insight, your own understandings, and take what I think and say and process it. And that's what Martin Buber, the great philosopher, called an I thou. So don't double think. Don't say, oh, is this a good question? Usually, in my experience, if the question's on your mind, it's on other people's mind. So there's really no such thing as a stupid question. And secondly, this is the place where we really have to struggle with the big issues because it's complicated. To me, the greatest disappointment in my academic career is that too many of my peers, too many professors with fancy PhDs from the fanciest of universities aren't willing to say when it comes to Israel, it's complicated. Once we understand it's complicated, then we can talk to one another. Once it's complicated, we can start struggling together. But when it's so simple, that's when we're in trouble. 2 minutes about myself and the structure of today. Oh, I don't know what's happened here. We lost it. Oh, we're getting it? I know context is now a difficult word, but I used to say I'm a historian, my favorite text is context. We want to put things in context. We want to understand it historically, ideologically. We're going to start today by looking a little bit at October 7th and the Zionist challenges and opportunities of that moment. Then we're going to go back and try to understand what is this word Zionism? What is this movement Zionism? What does it mean? What did it mean then? What did it accomplish? And what does it mean today? And then we'll start looking at Israeli history, trying to see how some of these Zionist ideas were played out. But between each part of these three, we'll stop, take a breath for questions, comments, and pushback. But also, if along the way I say something that you don't understand or you want me to clarify, raise your hand and we can make this a little bit more informal. So first, a couple of things about myself. I was born on a hot July day. No, my name is Gil Troy. It means I have the best name in the world. It's short, it's punchy. When I had to fill out SATs, it was only 3 and 4 letters. It was really good. But most important, it means I fit in. It means that I get great reception at Greek restaurants. I get a lot of Helen of Troy jokes. I get a lot of Sparta jokes from a certain kind of male who was seen 300. But that was the great gift of America. My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents had different experiences, but the America that I grew up in and the America that you're growing up in allows you to flourish. It's an amazing thing in Jewish history. Now, the truth is, my Christian name, if you will, is Gilad Troyansky. But my father, who was part of what we call the boat people, right? They talk about how from 1880 to 1920, 2 million Eastern European Jews came on the boat, as if there was one the boat. So all of my grandparents had arrived in the United States of America by 1924, when they closed the immigration gates. And my father had the last name Troyansky. So he gave himself an Anskyectomy to fit in. But what else did he want? He wanted us to belong to the Jewish people too. So he saddled me with this weirdo named Gilad. And I had this name Gilad Troy. And even though I went to Salman Schachter School of Queens, a conservative day school in Queens, New York, all of my friends had normal names, James, Elliot, Mitchell. And I had this weirdo name. So I gave myself an oddectomy so I could fit in, Gil Troy. Like so many of you, I worked super hard. I had a sky-high GPA. I had good scores on the SATs. I wrote that insane college essay some of you, I'm sure, are working on about why I'm the most important person in the world, and that's why UCLA or USC or Harvard or Yale has to accept me. And we wonder why our college students come on campus with a little bit of attitude. And I was lucky I got the brass ring. I get to Harvard. And I like university so much. Look at me, I'm a case of Arrested Development. I got to university and never left, that I decided to go on for a PhD to teach American history. And there I am, teaching American history in the Holy of Holies, Harvard University, close to Bunker Hill, Lexington and Concord. And you know how we Jews always feel a little bit off, and we look at the real Americans as wasps, right? White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. You know how WASPs have first names that are last names and last names that are first names? Well, I have a last name as first name is a last name, Troy Bolton, Troy Aikman, Troy Don, right? So Richard John comes up to Gil Troy and he says, "There's so few WASPs like us around nowadays." And I put on my heaviest New York accent and say, "Even fewer than you think." But here was the genius, folks. I didn't feel that was a microaggression. We didn't have that word then. I didn't feel it was anti-Semitic. What did I think? The older people understand. I went, yes, I belong, I pass, it works. This is the great gift of America. And I was lucky I got my PhD. I'm teaching at McGill University up north, Canada, that country that everybody ignores in America. And you know how Canadians are more polite than Americans, and Torontonians are more polite than Montrealers. So I'm teaching at McGill University, which is in Montreal. And every year around April, 2 or 3 Torontonians come up to me and go, "Professor Troy, it's this big 150-person lecture course. It's very intimidating." So they rarely talk to the professor, which is a problem with American higher education. "Professor Troy, we're taking off the next 2 nights," as if we meet at night, right? But they're nervous. And I go, "Why?" And you know that hesitation you sometimes have before you out yourself as a Jew? So they go, "We're going back to Toronto for the Passover Seder." And I go, "Will you make up the work?" And they go, "Yeah." I say, "Will you do me one more favor?" They go, "Yeah." I say, "Will you also have a Chag Sameach?" "Oh, he's Jewish, we didn't know." And I liked that, right? And then we had we talked about it and it sort of humanized me beyond that podium. But I love the fact that I could be a Jew in my home. I could marry a beautiful Jewish woman and raise 4 Jewish amazing kids. But also went outside, be Gil Troy, American historian. And then 23 years ago, when Yasser Arafat led his people away from negotiations, straight to terror. And my academic colleagues, I worship in the Church of Academia. I believe in complexity, in liberal thought, in open-mindedness. I believe that if you say something that I disagree with, I should say, let's have coffee, let's learn from one another. Let's have that I vow. Instead, Israel apartheid, Zionism, racism. How could it be so simple? And everybody's so defensive, in the Jewish community too. And that word Zionism is becoming a dirty word. So before Yom Ha'atzmaut, April 2001, I wrote an 800-word essay that changed my life. And I kind of came out of the closet and publicly said, I am a Zionist. I'm a Zionist because I believe in the power of Jewish peoplehood, and Jews are a religion as well as a people. I'm a Zionist because I'm tied to this particular homeland, Eretz Yisrael, while also being a loyal citizen of the United States, of Canada, or wherever you might be. And I'm a Zionist because we have the right to establish a state on that homeland. We'll be talking about that more. And as a result of that, I started doing 2 careers. One, writing about American history, writing about the presidents, as you so kindly mentioned in your introduction, but also celebrating Israel, celebrating Zionism. I'm tired of the defensiveness. I'm tired of everybody apologizing for Israel. And in 2007, my wife, 4 kids, and I went on sabbatical to Israel. It turned into the world's longest sabbatical. They were 5, 7, 10, and 12 at the time. All of them have served in the Israeli army. And now let's go to October 6th. October 6th. So today what I want to do is I want to talk about how to have a genuine, authentic understanding of Israel, but also have some sense of pride, because it's an amazing story. We're part of this miracle in Jewish history, and miracle in human history, and miracle in liberal democratic history. But that doesn't mean that Israel's perfect. No country is perfect. And if you ever try to make an argument that Israel's perfect, you're going to lose. But you can say that Israel's enemies, and we have enemies, are perfectly evil when they do what they did on October 7th, when they hide behind civilians in what I call Hamaspitals, not hospitals, in Hamasks, not mosques, in killer gardens, not kindergartens. I can call them out. And we have this perfectly wonderful vehicle called democracy to try to fix whatever mistakes we make. So I want some pride, but I also want nuance and subtlety and sophistication in Israel education, which often is missing, I'm sorry to say. And I also want us to understand that it comes from this amazing thing called Zion. So on October 6th, the central tension in the Troy household was, could we survive a 25-hour holiday without talking about the wedding? My son Yoni had just gotten engaged a few months ago. She's a wonderful woman, but I don't know if you've had older brothers or sisters who've gotten married. Everybody talks about the wedding for months. And the other kids are getting a little annoyed. We wish we were back in those frustrations. And October 7th, as you well know, attack, horror, massacre, unspeakable evil. One of my sons scrambles up north to serve in the reserves and ends up serving 161 days. That's son Yoni, who's supposed to get married. My son Aviv is in Sri Lanka, and he hears a woman running into the Chabad house, yelling, "Jerusalem is burning, Yerushalayim bo'eret." And he runs back to his hotel, turns on his phone, and watches his WhatsApp group of commandos. He was a Duvdevan commando, that's the Fauda unit. He'd finished fighting in August, had left, was now traveling the Far East, and he watches on the alumni WhatsApp group, which usually is just sort of passing on jobs and gossip. This one got married, this one had a kid. Because the command and control centers failed in the South on October 7th, under so many rockets, with 3,500 well-trained terrorists coming in, with thousands of more coming in, Israelis improvised. And he watches on the WhatsApp how they fight back. And 5 of his friends died in Kfar Aza that day, alone. He flies home 2 days later, and we pick him up. And of course, at the time, we're all stuck in these horrific images, which I'll always show quickly. Right? We all know the images. We're stuck in pogrom. We're stuck in Holocaust. It's really interesting that even my most secular Israeli friends, and many of my most distant Jewish friends here, distant from Jewishness, saw this not just as an anti-Israel event, but as a Jew-hating event, an anti-Semitic event. And we're talking about Shoah. We're talking about pogrom. We're feeling helpless. And I say, when we pick up Aviv at the airport, and we're driving, "How's your friend Nisim?" "Oh, he was in Thailand. He just landed 2 hours before me." "How's your friend Oren?" True story. He started in Auckland, New Zealand, flew to Tahiti, to Los Angeles, and then flew home to Israel. The next time I saw him, I said, "Didn't you go to high school with my son Aviv?" "Oh, yeah." He said, "Didn't you learn geography?" Right? But everybody had to get home. 200,000 Israelis came home. And many of them went straight to fight. And we've had delegations from VBS and so many other places, which is amazing. Jews are supposed to run away from trouble. But no, we understand we run toward trouble and we help one another. And unfortunately, on that day, we know that the Israeli government failed. The IDF temporarily failed. And some people say that Zionism failed, and that's where I disagree. Zionism didn't fail that day, and here's my argument. So first of all, as we get into Jerusalem, Aviv says, "I have some bad news to tell you. My friend Ben, who was born in Vancouver, who had met Aviv and his gang on an Israel program, who decided to make Aliyah to move to Israel and served as a combat medic, and then, as you can see from the middle, went off to South America. This big lover of life, Ben, who had become part of our family, went to the rave, the concert, and is missing. And on Monday morning, when I drive Aviv back to his base, he says something awful. He says, "I hope Ben is dead, because I'd rather have him killed than be in the hands of those barbarians, having seen what they had done on October 7th. There's no right answer, right? But think of where we're at. Think of how low we've gone as a people. And we come to Ben's funeral on Wednesday because they found his body on Tuesday. And it felt like it should be his wedding, right? People come from all over the country. I'm an academic, I'm a Slav, but I put on a nice shirt so I wouldn't be so schlumpy. And his sister, his 18-year-old sister who eulogized him, said that. She said, I'm looking at the Ben fan club. This should be Ben's wedding. But the first eulogy was his kibbutz father, adopted father in a sense, who got up and he told the story of October 7th. And that Ben and another friend, Itai, who was trained as a commando from Duvdevan as well, didn't run away, but ran toward the trouble. And they stole a golf cart, and they used the golf cart to try to bring the wounded to the first aid tent, because who could imagine what kind of event it was? And the last picture we have of Ben is from a video, and he's crouching. He's stolen a medical pack. He broke into an ambulance and stole it, which he didn't learn in Vancouver, but whatever. And then he was killed in a hail of bullets. As soon as I heard that story, I flipped a switch, and we need to flip that switch here too in Los Angeles. I went from pogrom, from Holocaust, from failure, from misery, from weakness, to Zionism. Because Zionism can't solve the problem of the Jew hater. We talked about this at Milken School the other day, right? Jew hatred, anti-Semitism is the problem of the Jew hater. Zionism, though, gave us a sense of tools, a series of tools, how to fight back, how to defend ourselves when necessary, but how to build, rebuild, and dream always. And I call this the Jiu-Jitsu. Take the negative and turn it into a positive. And I'm trying to give you a vocabulary how to think about this stuff. That awful feeling we all had on October 7th, oh my goodness, is a peoplehood feeling. I feel connected. I feel attacked even though I'm sitting here in beautiful Encino. I feel attacked by what's going on there because I'm a part of this amazing thing called the Jewish people. Right now, we're in what I call a Zionist movement, a Zionist moment. Many of our parents and grandparents had that in 1967 when they almost lost the state. Now we have this opportunity to say, what does this state mean to me, even if I never live there? What does it mean to me to have a Jewish state? What does it mean to be a part of the Jewish people? And we saw how anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, this hatred, came together. And in America, we're seeing anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. And in Israel, we saw anti-Semitic anti-Zionism. There's no difference. We're still seeing a lot of tension and chaos in Israel. I'm trying to set a Zionist agenda. What do we have to do? We have to defend ourselves. We also have to think about how do we improve. And we have to do an exorcism. Before we talk about the wonderful things about Israel, we have to see all the big lies. And I don't have time to go through each one of the lies. But you can almost tell a whole history of Israel through these very colorful and very ugly lies. The big black lie is that since 1947, when Israel had a partition plan and there was a compromise with the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs and the Palestinian Jews, the Palestinian Arabs rejected the compromise. And since that day, November 20th, 1947, even before Israel was established, they've been trying to blacken our reputation, trying to say we don't have the right to exist, trying to say that their failure to have a compromise, their failure to destroy us in May 1948 is our fault, and they call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. They brought it upon themselves, my friends. The big red lie, because it came from the Soviet Union, and that was their big color red, communists, is that Zionism is racism. When we know there are dark-skinned Israelis and light-skinned Israelis. There are dark-skinned Israelis and light-skinned Palestinians. It's not a racial fight, folks. But they always want to make it racial because they want to demean us. The big black and white lie these days is somehow Jews and Israelis have white privilege. That we got it all easily. And again, that it's all about race. I call it the big red, white, and blue lie because it's also an attack on America, is that America and Canada and Israel are settler colonialist states, and therefore anything that happens to them. What did they say on October 7th? This is what decolonization looks like. We're settler colonialists. We're the original Aboriginal people. We're rooted in the same land, reading from the same Bible, telling the same stories, speaking the language of Hebrew. We put the in indigeneity. We are rooted in this land. That doesn't mean that other people might not also be in love with this land. And now I'm talking about Manhattan, New York, right, where Manhattan was bought for $24 from the natives. But nobody questions America's right to exist, Australia's right to exist in the way they question Israel's right to exist. And now this big green lie that Israel is somehow committing genocide against the Palestinians when it's simply trying to defend it. And you, my friends, are in a wave of what I call the sanctimony cyclone. Look at the number of New York Times articles in the first 5 months of the war. 3,600 articles. Look how many New York Times articles there were about Mosul, which America was fighting. For 9 months, twice as long a time, 80 articles. So when every day there's this relentless attack, it makes a huge impact on you, on us. And I call it the sanctimony cyclone because it's really easy to sit in judgment. But what's really happening? And we were betrayed. We were betrayed by feminists. Not every feminist, but too many feminists who for years have been saying, "Me too, silence is violence." And I shared this with the community so you can get these slides. And on November 30th, when the National Organization of Women finally started talking about this problem, they didn't mention the word Hamas. They didn't mention the word Gaza. They just talked about rape during wartime. How could you not stand up for the Jews who suffered? So we have to fight back. I call this dignity Zionism. We also have to, as I said, have to stop fighting one another and all the political dysfunction. And the third thing, and I'm suggesting Zionism is a response to every one of these, the third thing is so many of us these days, so many of our friends these days, so many young, amazing students who come to McGill campus, where I taught for many years, or Harvard, or UCLA, or USC, come to school without what you have, a sense of roots, a sense of community, a sense of family. And I'm arguing that Zionism is a response to this, can fix these problems. Is Zionism perfect? No. Is Zionism the only answer? No. But Zionism is my answer. So let's go back in time. And we ask the question, oh, sorry, it didn't come out very well. Where do I begin? Where do I start telling the story of Israel, of Jewish people, of Zionism? We go back 3,500 years to the tent of Abraham and Sarah. We go back to Genesis, Bereshit, Yud Bet, Genesis 12. And God says, leave your house, or leave your house, right? I don't know what God's voice was. It wasn't always a big booming male voice. It could have been a still voice. Leave your house, your father's house, and I will make of you a great religion. What does he say? I will make of you a great nation. I said, chap, I will make of you a great nation. It's a religious moment. God is speaking. Abraham and Sarah, Avram and Sarai go from, they get the holy hay, and they become Avraham, Abraham, and Sarah. It's a religious revelation, but in that moment, in our DNA, is the fact that we are what I call an Oreo cookie. The Oreo cookie has the cookie part and the cream part, and that's what makes the Oreo cookie. We have the nation part and the religion part, and that's what makes us unique. Not better, not worse, but we have that peoplehood thing in us. And we're tied to the particular Jewish homeland. This land. Try celebrating a year's worth of Jewish holidays and say, oh, I don't really believe in Eretz Yisrael. You can't have apples and honey on Rosh Hashanah. You can't sing next year in Jerusalem on Pesach, right? So much of our identity is built around this homeland. So thousands of years ago, it was all about creating this amazing thing. The Torah, the Bible was all about creating this amazing thing on the Jewish homeland. In the mid-1800s, as French became French, as the Italians became Italian, as the Americans became American, right, and nationalism starts, we see that the Jewish people also said, we're a people, we're a nation, we're a modern nation too. And since 1897, with the formal start of the Theodor Herzl's Zionist movement, we're pushing for Jewish statehood. Again, the Holy Trinity. We are a people, not just a religion. We have ties to a particular homeland, and the right to establish a state on that homeland. Now, I used a dirty word, and I have to apologize. Increasingly in modern America, when you use the word nationalism, that's triggering. Nationalism, we're told, because people think there's only one form of nationalism, or there are certain people who are trying to define nationalism as only one way. And I don't care whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump. But Donald Trump has defined nationalism in a certain way, and as a result, others say, well, if I hate Trump, I have to hate nationalism. Well, that's like saying Donald Trump breathes air, and if I hate Trump, I have to hate air. Nationalism is a neutral tool. Nationalism, and by the way, look, this goes back even before Donald Trump. In 2007, an American ambassador representing the United States of America says nationalism is like cheap alcohol. First it makes you drunk, then it makes you blind, and then it kills you. And people talk about patriotism as blind patriotism. Now think about it. In the 1940s, the Jewish people experienced nationalism at its absolute worst, called Nazism. And in 1948, the Jewish people experienced nationalism at its most enlightening, its most empowering, called Zionism. Nationalism is a neutral tool. This is really important to me going to university. Because people say, oh, I'm not a nationalist. I'm an American historian. I can't explain America's successes without talking about nationalism. And I don't understand how to get out of America's failures without successful nationalism. But my nationalism isn't a nationalism of walls, it's a nationalism of wings, with my right wing and my left wing flying together and soaring and together saying we can be a better by working together, by dreaming together, by building together. Back in the 1950s, Sir Isaiah Berlin, even then said, oh my goodness, people think that nationalism is pathological. Nationalism is just about defining yourself by who you're not and who you hate. But he said, no, in the Jewish case, all it means is you're a part of a family. You're a part of a community. Did any of you ever travel with your family outside of the United States or in some strange place and bump into a bunch of Jews? We call that bageling, right? What happens when you bagel one another? What happens to your face? What happens to your body language? What do? You smile, right? You connect. Oh my goodness, right? We're fellow Jews in South Africa. We're fellow Jews on this cruise. We're fellow Jews here and there, right? It doesn't mean, oh, we're the master race. We're so much better than everybody else. It just means we're mishpacha, right? On October 7th, we felt it negatively, but then have turned it into something positive. But we have this sense that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And so that three-part response is so important, understanding how important it is to have this land, this homeland. And it doesn't mean we love America any less. Because love is one of these things like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more it grows. So I don't buy the either or. It's that we're a people, the Oreo cookie, and that we are the state of Israel. And so, formally, what does Zionism mean? It means that we are people, have the right to a particular homeland, the right to establish a state on that homeland, and Zionism is the movement of Jewish national liberation. Before 1948, the idea was to establish the state, but also rebuild the new Jew. Since then, we defend the state when necessary, but we build, rebuild, dream about it always. And so when we talk about the anti-Semitic anti-Zionism and the anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, we say we're going to respond with what I call dignity Zionism. Dignity Zionism. Dignity Zionism says, we're liberals. You can't hijack liberalism from us. You can't block us at the intersection. And when we fight against hatred, we fight against all forms of hatred. Anti-Semitic hatred, Jew hatred, hatred against blacks, hatred against women. Because hatred also grows and grows. And you can't just be a hater of a little bit. It starts spreading the poison in your soul. Right here on Ventura Boulevard, it says that rat poison poisons wildlife too. Human poison, anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, poisons democracies too, and poisons our souls. So dignity Zionism, we fight against that. Responsibility Zionism is we fight for a sense of a new way of working together, respecting one another. And here we have to learn from the great Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik, who told us, and we read this yesterday in the Parsha, we were an Edah, we're also a Machaneh. We're a camp, we're connected, we're a people who just care about one another because we're a particular tribe. That was Yetziat Mitzrayim, that was leaving Egypt, looking out for one another. Can we really cross the Dead Sea together? Yes, we can. But when we get to Sinai, we have a vision. Edah comes from Ed, from witness. We become a people with a vision, with values. And I add that we're also connected to culture. Yerushalayim Shel. How do you all know that? How could it be that even though you might have different political perspectives, you might come from different families, you might come from different parts of this area, you all know that, right? We're connected culturally as well. And we need a new political Zionism. I don't just want to defend Israel. I want to perfect Israel. I want to find what's wrong with Israel. I want to find where I disagree with Bibi Netanyahu or Benny Gantz or Yair Lapid or Ben Gvir. It doesn't matter who. And make it better. Because that's what Zionism is about too. And when we see what happened in the South, we can simply say, oh, that happened to them. Or we can say, wow, this is an opportunity for us to build and rebuild. My son Aviv, the commander who flew in, who was Ben's friend, he fought for 3.5 months. And then when he finally got out, took 2 weeks off, and now is with 17 of his friends in Be'eri, one of the kibbutzim that was overrun. And they're picking clementines, and they're doing guard duty. And look, they're living in an apartment which was redone. You can see that the white door was repainted. But it still has the graffiti markings of the soldiers and the holy ultra-Orthodox Zaka warriors who went in to clean up the blood. Can you imagine what it is like to live in that? But what they're doing is what I call the jiu-jitsu, turning the negative into a positive. And finally, a third plank of my Zionism, we have dignity Zionism. We fight for the dignity of us and everybody else, a new liberalism, a true liberalism. Responsibility Zionism, we take responsibility. And identity Zionism. We all know that John Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. I want to ask, what can your country do for you? What does it mean to you? In 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, when you're in college, when you're a little bit post-college, what does it mean to live in Los Angeles and have this Jewish state? How does it lift us up? How does it inspire us? How does it give us a platform? How does it give us meaning in a world that is constantly knocking us down and trying to strip us of meaning? And that, to me, is the power of Zionism. Before we go a little bit more into the introduction, the deeper meaning of Zionism, cleansing breath, questions, comments, disagreements. We'll move on. So Zionism, what I was trying to do was show how I think about Zionism. What was I basically doing? I was saying there are a series of problems today. Problems in Western culture, problems in the way some non-Jews, not all non-Jews, and we need to work with our non-Jewish friends to fight this as well, the way some non-Jews treat us. There are problems in Israel. Zionism is about solving problems. Zionism is about building a better identity, building a better homeland, building a better world. And I just wanted to show you how I think that through. Because people usually just talk about the Zionist idea, which was, we're a people and we desperately need a homeland. And today we live in a world of what I call the Zionist ideas, all these different ideas. And people love to pick on Zionism. But I once spoke to a young Israeli who said, Zionism? Israel's a country. Israel makes mistakes, like any country. Israel can be problematic sometimes. But Zionism is the dream. Zionism is the invitation to make things better. Zionism is the push to make the world a better place. And let's go back. Trace your family history. Back 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. Wherever they lived, it wasn't much fun. Wherever they lived, to be a Jew meant usually to be miserable, oppressed, persecuted, depressed. You know the image of the Jew, right? The broken down Yid, the weak Jew. It was an anti-Semitic stereotype, but many Jews kind of fulfilled that anti-Semitic stereotype because you know that happens when the hater comes and you give the hater too much power, you become what the hater wants you to be. It's a very sick thing. And it becomes a cycle. You become weaker and weaker. And Zionism said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. You can't push me around. You can't persecute me. You can't just make fun of me because of my big nose, which I may have or may not have, but you're going to exaggerate. As we talked about, turn me into some kind of monster, turn me into some kind of phantom. And we are a people with tremendous roots, with a tremendous story. We have to solve this problem. You all know about the American Revolution. That was to get rid of the British. The French Revolution was to get rid of the king. The Russian Revolution was to get rid of the Tsar. The Zionist revolution was doubly hard because it was a double revolution. It was a revolution to change who was in control in the land of Israel, to go back to it being a Jewish homeland, a Jewish state, Jewish power, Jewish sovereignty. But also it was a change within the Jew himself and herself. We're not the victims anymore. We return to history. We're actors, not victims. We're players in the historical game. And we want to change the world. And we're not going to make Zionism only anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. We're not going to just be against, we're going to be for something. We're going to be for all kinds of wonderful ideas. So now think about it, you have two clashes. Clash number one is the old, broken down, persecuted, weak Jew. And this dream of King David, of King Solomon, of Devorah, of Miriam, of changing the Jew. And you also have a clash between traditional Judaism and the beauty of being modern. And that's the story of somebody like Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was raised to fit in, was raised in the 1800s when there's a little bit of what they called enlightenment, some light coming in. Leave the ghetto. His father became a banker. He always dressed beautifully. He loved his big black beard and his piercing black eyes. He was very proud of who he was. As a man of the Enlightenment, as a new Jew. But he kept on coming into contact with people who didn't look at him as a human being, didn't look at him as a fellow European, but looked at him just as a Yid, a Jew. And he said, oh my God, if I can't survive here as a human being as well as a Jew, maybe we need a change. And the simple story he likes to tell about himself, which is a bit of oversimplification, is that there's a Jew by the name of Alfred Dreyfus. People know about the Dreyfus trial? Alfred Dreyfus is a French army captain. What could be better than a Jew in the 1800s who finally become a French army captain? And people around him were jealous, and they set him up. And he was accused of being a traitor when he wasn't. And he was thrown in jail. And in Paris, enlightened Paris, modern Paris, when Dreyfus was convicted, the mobs come out and they don't yell down with Dreyfus, that individual. They don't yell down with the traitors. They yell down with les Juifs, down with the Jews. And Theodor Herzl goes, oh my goodness. They'll never accept us. So what do we have to do? We have to understand that we're a people. We're a proud people. We're the great-great-grandchildren of princes, of prophets, of heroes. And we are one people. And as a people, just like the Italians are going to live in Italy and the French are going to live in France, we're going to live back on our soil, on our home, Eretz Israel. But look at his nationalism. The world will be liberated by our freedom. People are going to be inspired by the beautiful world we live in and the world we create. Now, people would say to Zionists, oh, what do you need that land? Go somewhere else. Chaim Weizmann, who became the first president of the state of Israel, was in England once, and one of the British lords looks at him and goes, what do you need that land for? And Chaim Weizmann looks at him and goes, you know, every Sunday, you could go visit 10 old ladies on your block, but instead you travel 20 miles to visit your mother, because she's your mother. We're not just going to pick a random land. We're going back to our homeland, where people have lived for all these years, where every time we pray, right? In VBS, when you stand up, you pray. You don't pray to the gods of California. You don't pray to Hollywood, although some of us do. You pray to Jerusalem. Or at least somebody got the joke. So the idea in the start was we are going to solve this problem by creating an amazing, amazing place called the State of Israel. And some socialist Zionists said, I am a socialist and I am a Zionist. So I'm going to put the two things together. Now, some of you may no longer be socialists. Once upon a time, many Jews were socialists. But what we can learn from that is you don't just say, oh, I'm going to put my kippah away. I'm just going to be my normal self, and I'm going to be my Jewish self. It's an opportunity to bring it together, bring both parts together, and do it on your land. And the poetess Rachel sings about the joys of our land, of returning to our land, of rebuilding our land, of having something that's ours, not just the ghetto. And Rav Kook articulates a religious Zionism rooted in the Bible, because we are not just a people, but we are also a religion. This comes from that. And Zev Jabotinsky says we have to have a liberal form of Zionism, I don't want this socialism. I want capitalism. I want individualism. And I also want strength and pride. And Ahad Ha'am says, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. From Zion shall come forth a new Torah. We'll be inspired culturally by this new place. And when you walk around this synagogue, when you walk around your Jewish day schools, you see how many symbols there are of that place, because we're one. Now, these are the 5 mainstream forms of Zionism. And I add a 6th to include you, from Louis Brandeis to the diaspora. Because Zionism is also not just about building and rebuilding in the land, but also building and rebuilding right here in our homeland, wherever you are. I was very upset shortly after October 7th when at Cornell University, somebody threatened the kosher dining hall. Did you hear about this? And he went online and he said, we're going to attack the kosher dining hall, West 104. What did they do at Cornell University? Anybody know? Worse than nothing, they shut down, right? It was truly nothing, right? They shut down the kosher dining hall. What would the Zionists say? We don't do that. We don't run away. Zionism was the revolution inside, not just outside. I said, why not invite the football team and the lacrosse team for kosher steaks? And let them come and defend us and work with us. But also, we have to have a different mentality where we're not the victims right here in the United States of America anymore. And one of the things I've learned about this, I call this the win-win. When I turn to my non-Jewish friends and say, come for a kosher steak, or sign, as I did at McGill University, a petition against BDS, against boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and I always go to my non-Jewish colleagues, not just my Jewish colleagues, it's the win-win. I learn who my friends are, and I learn who my friends are. And so some of them say no. But when I turned to John Zucchi, a good Italian Catholic, and asked him to sign, what we did was we wanted to have 10% of the McGill faculty sign it in 24 hours. Why? Because I know I could never get 100% of the faculty, but I figured if I got 10% in one day, that would be pretty impressive. That would make a headline. When you do activism, always be very specific and pragmatic and only do something you can win. John Zucchi immediately sends me an email back. You know what he says? Thank you. He said, I'm watching this happen to my Jewish students on campus. My Jewish students. I'm watching this happen to my colleagues, my friends. I didn't know what to do. You gave me a language. You showed me what to do. The Zionist response is not just to sit there, but to learn from Ben alav shalom and make it happen. So part one is I wanted you to understand that what was going on was an amazing, rich series of ideas. How do I make this Jewish state perfect? Some say with a kibbutz. Some say with a capitalist revolution. Some say with a religious revolution. Some say with a more secular revolution. But they all said we're going to do it on our homeland. Before we look at the results, I want to stop and see if there are any questions. Any pushback? Do you understand what I'm saying? You with me? Right, we're talking about a peoplehood and a broken people becoming whole again, becoming fixed again. Not being the victims of history, but starting to drive the train. And that's for you to do too. Don't let this ugly moment in American history define you. Figure out how you're going to redefine this ugly moment in American history. But not just alone, but with others too. So it's an interesting question. Before I get to that question, I'm going to go to a different part of the question, which is one of the problems is, and I talked about this yesterday in my sermon, so I apologize for repeating, is the Jews confuse, right? Because when you talk about Mexico and Mexicanism, right? It's Mexico, it's Mexicanism. Zionism is the movement of Jewish national liberation, right? We said that there's this religion called Judaism. There's this people called the Jewish people who practice the Jewish religion. If we were simpler, we would call our form of nationalism Judaism, and we would call our country not Israel but Judea, And then we'd see the flow line. So my simple answer to you would be, well, just like Jews of Judea with Judaism and Judaism support their homeland, so too do Italians, so too do Mexicans. And one of the beautiful things about America is America allows you to be both a proud American and a strong, proud Mexican or Italian or Irish. I don't know if people of your generation watch The Sopranos, but I know there are some people who've watched The Sopranos over the years. And I call myself a Tony Soprano Zionist. What does that mean? The Sopranos is about this mafia don, and he's really comfortable with his Italianism, right? But he's also a proud American. So, and what's interesting is that I'm involved with the Birthright Movement, which brings Jews for free for a 10-day trip to Israel. It's amazing how often we get requests from Koreans, from Irish Americans. I don't know if we've had from Mexican Americans saying, how do you do that? That's an amazing thing because you're allowing them to become proud Americans, strong Americans, but also have that sense of a rich heritage. And it's a great opportunity. It's an opportunity that Zionism allows us. And that, by the way, our parents and grandparents were afraid of, right? Don't stand out. Fit in. Be a Troy. But my father said, be a Troy, but also be a Gilad, which was really odd, but it was worth it. Yes, hi. Previous. Thank you. So, in the 3-hour version of this, we would talk about the fact that Eretz Yisrael is the land of Israel, right? The temple is destroyed, first in 586 BCE and then in 70 CE. Second time by the Romans. When the Romans destroy it, they're really annoyed by how long it took them to defeat the Jews. And then there's a second revolt of Bar Kokhba in 132. After that, the Emperor Hadrian comes in and he is really angry. And he understands that the best way to crush somebody is to strip them of their dignity and their identity. And so he takes the name Eretz Yisrael and he changes it from Israel to Palestine. And so what's really interesting is the British had a mandate to cover Palestine. My father-in-law, who was Romanian, who had a heavy Romanian accent, used to love to say, I am Palestinian, because he was in what we call Israel and Palestine in the 1940s under British rule. And he had literally a passport which said Palestinian, because you had Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs. And then after 1948, when we established not the country of Judea, but the country of Israel, we all became Israelis. The Palestinians, who wanted to distinguish themselves from the other Arabs, said, we are Palestinians. So history always gets complicated. So thank you for that important question. So now let's go and think about Israeli history. Are there any more questions? Because I think that you've been abused. I think all too often in Jewish day schools, the best Jewish day schools, the way you learn Israeli history is what I call 48, 56, 67, 73 hike. You learn about Israel through the wars. You learn about Israel from the 1948 war, which established the state of Israel. You learn about Israel in the 1956 war, over the Sinai campaign, then the 67 war, then the 73 Yom Kippur, and now up to October 7th. What's the problem with that version of history? What do we miss? Life. We only see death. I'm an American historian. I teach courses about America in the 1980s, America in the 1990s. CNN has this great series of all the different decades, right? And what happens as soon as you just make that flip that switch? I don't teach American history from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War. I know there's also the War of 1812, the Mexican War, but I'm trying to make things easier. To World War I, to World War II, war. What happens? I get a distorted view of American history. So the version of history that we've always gotten is this, 48, 56, 67, each war. And I do two things. One, context. I go back and I say, where do I begin? And I tell the story going back to Abraham. I covered some of this. I go back, and your question actually teed up perfectly, so you get an A for the day. We see the two temples being built and then destroyed. We see exile. We see Zionism moving its way up, and all of you have this timeline. We see 1921 when the British come in after World War I. and control. First of all, they hive off 80% of Palestine, and it becomes the country of Jordan. And the 20% then they control. 1947 is the UN partition dividing Israel into what is the Jewish entity and the Arab entity. And there's a compromise. David Ben Gurion says this is an awful compromise. If you've ever seen the map of November 29th, 1947, it looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. How am I going to defend all these borders, all these holes? And they want Jerusalem to be internationalized? But he says, we just lost. We just lost so many people in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. We better compromise. But, and you have it now on your sheets, Arab leaders said no. We don't accept a compromise. We can't have 1 inch of Jewish territory on the Jewish state. And so Israel's established in 1948, and there are 7 Arab states attacked. That's the story you're always told. What about the fact that starting with the 1950s, there's a mass migration. 850,000 Jews come, especially from the Arab lands, and lo and behold, that gives Israel a stability, but also social challenges. Yes? So we're talking about this period between 1897 and 1947. So what happens is that there's a simple story and there's a more complicated story. The simple story the Palestinian propagandists tell, not every Palestinian, I'm very careful, I never say the Palestinians. They'll say Palestinian terrorists, they'll say Palestinian propagandists, they'll say Hamas, but I don't want to, I know how painful it is when people say the Jews. I hate that word the. You'll see I have a whole list of the thes I hate. Right? But the Palestinian propagandists will tell you that every Palestinian who now claims to be a Palestinian refugee, and they're the only people in the world who still have refugee status 4, 5, 6 generations, every one of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents had been living on that land forever. And then the Zionists came in. So there are 2 parts that are wrong in that story. One is that Jews had also, there were always Jews living in the 4 holy cities of Jerusalem, of Hebron, of Tiberias, Tiberia, and Tzfat. And second, things move. The Arabs were a nomadic people. The British census from 1922 to 1931 shows us that in those 9 years, tens of thousands of Muslims also came. Why? Because there was prosperity. So what happens? Starting in the 1880s, 1890s, more Jews start coming. And of course, most of the Jews, as I said at the beginning, come on the boat. They come to America. But a small group of pioneers, of chalutzim, start building in Israel, in the land of Israel, which is at the time called Palestine. And by 1921, it's controlled by the British. And as the Jews build, and as the British come and bring order, there's an economic boom, and some more Arabs come in. I don't say that Palestinians have no tie to that land. It doesn't help. Because I know how insulting it is when they say we have no tie to the land. I say history's complicated, history's messy. So we have to somehow figure out how do we live together. And so they start building, and also the Palestinians, some Palestinians, and their leadership in particular, there's a great book called Palestine Betrayed that says most of the Palestinians, meaning the Arabs, were happy to work with the Jews. But their leaders, like Haj Amin al-Husseini, wanted to destroy the Jews. And so by 1947, the British are saying this is too much of a headache. We're still suffering from World War II. We don't want to handle this. What do? They turn to the United Nations and they come up with a compromise. Does that help fill in the blanks? So 1948, we talk about the war, but let's also talk about the mass migration. 1956, we talk about the Sinai campaign. Let's also talk about, in the 1960s, you have what I call the love-in. You start having everybody's in love with Israel and the kibbutz, and it's a whole different vibe. And the fact that Israel has women soldiers is so surprising in the 1960s. Israel's an experiment in a new kind of democracy. Then you have the 1967 war, and unfortunately, for all the victory of 1967, you also see a certain arrogance. Oh, we don't have to worry about those Arabs. And then unfortunately, there's the 1973 Yom Kippur War. I'm rushing through this on purpose because I'm just trying to give you a flow. right? I'm just trying to give you a sense of how the country builds. And then we never would have expected in 1973. All of you who are so depressed and so worried about Israel right now, go back to October 1973 when 2,700 young Israeli kids in a much smaller country of 3 million died defending their country. The one thing we knew, everybody knew in October 1973, was that we would never have peace, especially with Egypt. It was inconceivable. It was ridiculous. It was insane. And by 1979, we're signing a peace treaty with Egypt, which still holds. Then in the 1980s, Israel starts dealing with a great inflation. You see what I'm trying to do? We're not just talking about wars now. We're talking about economics, society, culture, politics, because that's a real country. 1982, Israel attacks Lebanon because the PLO had established a state within the state. 1987 it's their language, intifada. Intifada means the noble uprising, the shaking off. We start seeing high tech, and the high tech story, the startup nation story. We see an attempt at peace with the Oslo Peace Accords. So we see this back and forth of tremendous prosperity, tremendous creativity, tremendous progress. And if we had time, we could go to every one of these ideas and see how it's rooted in socialist Zionism, in liberal Zionism, in revisionist Zionism, in religious Zionism. It's very important to emphasize that in 2005, Israel withdrew from every single inch of Gaza. And the fact that Hamas choose to turn it into Hamasistan and not choose it and not turn it into the Riviera is on them, not on us. People say, oh, Israel, if just you gave more to them, then they'd be happy. Israel gave them every inch, and look what they did with it. In the 2010s, we see a normalization and a demonization. And so now, look, the way I do it is we have the 48, 56, 67 hike in the middle, but on the sides, we start seeing all these changes, all these ideas. I want to finish by summarizing, but before I do, I want to see if there are any questions, comments, or disagreements. Yes, hi. Let me hold off on that for the finale, okay? Because I think that's a great way of framing the finale. So first, I'm trying to get us thinking in broader terms, right? I know we've covered a lot of territory today, but I just wanted you understanding that the way sometimes we're told about Israel, or the way we read about it in the New York Times, the LA Times, the way you hear about it on CNN with one line, just requires a little more depth. So the first revolution, think about and I did 7 for the 7 decades, right? We're no longer the broken down Jew. We have sovereignty, we have power. Now, power sometimes can be problematic. We have tremendous power to destroy, we also have tremendous power to build. How we manage that power is one of the great challenges for all of us. Second, we offered a welcoming Jewish home to Holocaust survivors, to 850,000 refugees from Arab lands. You have it also in your notes. To Ethiopians. What other country has welcomed in Black Africans? And with all the mistakes we made along the way, when you look, by the way, at so many people who've died, Ethiopians have died, and religious Jews have died, and secular Jews have died, and Israeli Arabs have died, and Druze have died. We've all died together. Now, of course, the question is, can we learn how to live together? But Israel became a refuge. Israel accepted every Jew, but also accepts anyone who's also willing to go through a parallel citizenship process. Third, we changed the Jewish image. How could it be that we gave the world Wonder Woman? That wouldn't have happened 100 years ago. It's a miracle. The power of Gal Gadot, the power of the Israeli Air Force, but also the pride. We in the United States of America walk around with more pride as Jews than our parents and great-grandparents did because of Israeli achievements and Israeli power. Fourth, we created this crazy thing, this Western-style capitalist democracy with a strong Jewish flavor. I love my Israeli friends who go, Ani chiloni, I'm secular. I go, great. There's a hot new restaurant that just opened up in Tel Aviv. I can only get reservations at 7 o'clock on Friday night. Would you join me? They go, I can't go. I go, why not? What do they say? My mother will kill me. Why is your mother going to kill you? Because every Friday night at 7, you might go out to a club at 10, but what do you do at 7 o'clock? You're home for Shabbat dinner. There's a Jewishness to the place. One of the things I love, you ever see an Israeli man walking by in December, let's say, and they're lighting Hanukkah candles, right? And he doesn't have a kippah on his head. What does he do? He puts anything on his head, right? You've seen that before, right? Now, these, big macho guys with the sunglasses usually on, they take the sunglasses down and they put them on. What are they doing? They're literate. They understand that you want to show some respect when you're passing by a Hanukkah lighting ceremony. There's a depth of Jewishness there, even though it's so modern. And that's the power. This is the Ad Lo Yodah festival, the Purim festival. Purim's a national holiday. Now, our Israeli Arab brothers and sisters have free rights, and they can also celebrate their holidays. But I don't know about you, but on December 25th, when somebody comes up to me and says, Happy Holidays, you know what I usually say? Merry Christmas. Because I respect the right of the majority to celebrate Christmas. It's not my holiday, except that one year we had Christmaka. So in Israel, we have Hanukkah and Purim and Shabbat. And that gives us a sense of Jewishness, that gives us a sense of literacy. And wow, reviving Hebrew, which was the language of just prayer. So Eliezer ben Yehuda created this thing. What do? Oh, there's this Alexander Graham Bell created this thing, and Eliezer ben Yehuda has to create a name for it. So he calls it the Sach Rachok, the far talker. Now I challenge you to go to the streets of Tel Aviv and say, oh, Eza Yofi Shel Sach Rachok. You have a beautiful far talker. They'll look at you as you're nuts, right? What do we call it today? The telephone or the pelephone, the wonder phone. What creativity, what cultural power. I'm from New York, so I love pigs in blankets. What do they call it? Moshe b'teva, Moses in a basket. It's just delightful. And this traumatized my poor daughter Dina when we came to Israel because she loved cotton candy, and it's sometimes called sarot safta, grandma's hair. So, and finally, the seventh achievement. The seventh achievement is creating a strong, proud diaspora. American Jewry was much weaker when there was no Israel. American Jews were much more apologetic. American Jews looked over their shoulders much more. When you stand for Israel, when you fight for Israel, when you sometimes give money to candidates because of Israel, you're exercising your democratic muscle, but you're showing a certain power. And that tees us up for the final question, unless there are questions. So let me summarize. Again, first of all, I really thank you for giving your time. And I hope this is the start of a journey and really the start of a back and forth. Because I know we covered a lot of territory in a very small amount of time. And again, you can get a copy of the slideshow, the PowerPoint, if you wish. I am calling for a Zionist revolution in America, in Canada, in Australia, meaning throughout what we call the diaspora, and in Israel as well. We need both. And it's like a Venn diagram. There's an overlap in which both of them are the same, like when I call for responsibility Zionism, talking to one another with more respect. And here, by the way, I've used this joke with some of you before, but it's so good I'll use it again. My Rebbe, I always say, is Ed Koch, the former mayor of New York. He said, if you agree with me on 7 of 12 things, please vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 of 12 things, please see a psychiatrist. The notion today that everything is all or nothing is toxic to democracy and toxic to the Jewish community. So we need a Zionist revolution all over. And the overlap is mostly the same, which is about understanding how lucky we are. We live in a world of me, my, more, now, mall. I know we're here, the Holy of Holies, the Sherman Oaks Galleria. It's the most important mall in America. At least it was before the mall in America was built. There's more to life than that. There's more to life than last week's most popular YouTube video of some baby drooling or some cat rolling around. Zionism gives me and my friends and my kids and my community a story, a structure, a framework. So we both need Zionism in Israel and throughout the Jewish world, and we each need a different kind of Zionism. And right now, We're seeing two different kinds of Zionism on display. In Israel, we're seeing 80% of the community has been volunteering. We've seen so many people, the 200,000 who came back, the 350,000 who fought. We're seeing just tremendous heroism. But I'm also seeing a lot of heroism in the United States of America. When my kids stand up and fight, they get a lot of what's called firgun. They get a lot of, hey, attaboy, attagirl, you're doing great. Where are you serving? When you guys stand up on university campuses, and you don't want to fight even, but you just wear a Jewish star or a hostage sticker or tag, that requires a spiritual courage too. So I don't like the game of who's better and who's more courageous. We're all on a journey. And what I wanted to do today was just give you a little sense, a little taste of that journey. And just to finish up with two of the stories. One, I left you with a wedding dilemma. Yoni was supposed to get married on November 26th. What you guys call Thanksgiving Sunday, we just call Sunday. Because we wanted Americans to come. So some of the Americans didn't come, but my brothers came. And on November 26th, we had a wedding of weddings. We had 450 people. My poor wife had a list of 42 maybes. Because we didn't know if they were going to come. And they came from the north and they came from the south. And my friends, I've discovered something new called heavy metal dancing. You know what heavy metal dancing is? I've gotten to the age where when you're in the center of the hora, of the circles of dancing, it's kind of dangerous because they're pushing. Heavy metal dancing is when they come, 42 of them, with submachine guns on their shoulders, and they're dancing and you're bumping into the submachine guns. But wow, it was amazing. 3,200 babies were born in Jerusalem alone in October. We are a people who keep choosing life. And that's our secret. Here in the United States of America, we refuse to be cowed. We refuse to be intimidated. We refuse to be silenced. And there in Israel, we refuse to let the haters win. I'm Yisrael Chai. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I also want to explain that part of the role that VBS is going to serve moving forward is introducing resources into the lives of our young people. And so not every community is fortunate enough to bring Gil Troy to build relationships with our young people, but I want to explain that what Gil said to you in the beginning is an extraordinary, extraordinary offer, that you could email him from high schools and college campuses and be in touch with issues that are going on. I mean, it goes without saying that I'm always available to all of our students, and Rabbi Feinstein is always available to all of our students. But the idea that we bring in experts, that we bring in world-renowned scholars and academics, professors, authors, to make sure that you have somebody to email at any time in your life to say, I'm in a class, somebody just said something. I'm with a professor, I don't understand what he wants from me. It seems to conflict with my Jewish identity. What should I do? And the question of what should I do as you get older, more and more you'll realize the question of what should I do is really a question of who should I turn to? Who should I turn to? And we have to introduce you to more and more people to answer that question so that you in your mind begin to fill out an address book of your own, of people that you trust, people that you've met, people that you can turn to. Thank you for spending this hour and a half with us on Sunday. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Shavua Tov, everybody.